Okay, class, this should be day 6 for the Civil Rights Unit, Monday, April 20th. That's the day you're intended to watch it. I'm recording these a little early. Hopefully, the reenactment, you were able to see that. I had to switch up my plans a little bit. I always do this ahead of time. So, in my world, it's Friday, and I was going to do the reenactment outside, but oddly enough, it's snowing. So, uh, hopefully that reenactment help it make a little bit more sense. I'm going to show you a PowerPoint today that should help it make a little bit more sense. Um, the objectives today are just focusing on these last two again, particularly the magic bullet theory with the shock of the nation after the assassination of JFK. Tomorrow, we'll get back into a little bit more of the notes and how this all affected the civil rights movement, because that is the focus of this particular chapter. So let's take a look at this magic bullet theory. So again, the magic bullet is basically trying to explain how three bullets, one of which entirely misses, can do all the damage that it does. But we're going to take a step back and say, let's look at what we know for a fact. We know JFK was killed November 22nd, 1963, while visiting Dallas, Texas, going through Dealey Plaza. We know that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Texas School Book Depository on the 6th floor, okay, up here. And that was roughly at the first shot, 88 yards away from the president's car. Now, almost a football field looks really far away if you're just looking with the regular eye. If you are on a scoped rifle, that is an incredibly close distance. And that helps explain how two of these three shots can unfortunately hit their mark. Now, fact number 3, and one of the most important facts, is that this gentleman here, Abraham Zapruder, happened to be there along with a large crowd. A lot of people want to see, a president, especially one they like, when they're in town. And he was filming this on his 8mm home camera. Not everybody had it's not like today where everybody's got a video on their cell phone, but a few people did have home video cameras, and he was one of the people that brought his to see the president. And his film can be used as a baseline to figure out several things. One, it's pretty clear there were 3 shots. Now, you did have some witnesses saying they heard 4, but there's an echo that can easily be created in any sort of plaza where you have a lot of buildings. I think most people agree there were 3 shots. You absolutely can time the you can do the timing between the first and the third shot at 5.6 seconds. Now that's important because that's pretty quick for the type of gun that Oswald had. Every time the first time, I assume it was loaded and ready to go, he pulls the trigger. For his second shot, he then had to lift over what's called a bolt, then back, then push that bolt forward, and then down to reload the next shot, and then aim and fire that shot. Then pull that bolt back over, back, forward, and down again. I'll get into this a little later. It's possible, but it's difficult. And then, of course, his film shows the controversial image of JFK's head moving really what seems to be, according to common sense, the wrong direction, moving uh, away from where we think, well, where the government told us the shot was fired from. So let's take a peek at some of these aspects. We've got JFK's limo, and again, I tried to explain this in the recreation, hopefully, but you have a 6-seat limo here. You got JFK here, his wife there, Governor Conley there, his wife there, and it's very hard to see, but 2 Secret Service agents in that very first row. And this car is going to be going through this arch of this plaza. And as the shots are fired, in front of the car would be at first the stockade fence, and then just a second or two later, the grassy knoll. And those are important areas because people thought they saw things from there. So, what do we know about the bullets fired then? We know that one of the 3 bullets hits an overpass beyond the car and entirely misses. It's pretty evident. There's no tissue or anything like that on this bullet. We feel really confident that this bullet just entirely missed. We have another shot, which is probably, well, it is the third shot, is the quote unquote kill shot to Kennedy's head. That means that the other bullet, which would have been the first or second fired, probably the first, that must then account for all of the other wounds. That's those wounds that I showed you in my demonstration where all the tape is. And that's why that's called that magic bullet, because just like I showed you in that demonstration, that means that bullet has to enter JFK's back 5 3/4 inches below his collar. Then it has to go up. Then it has to go through his throat in a knot in his tie. Then it enters the governor's fifth rib. Then the governor said his arm was down here, so it would have went down, which is another turn through the wrist. Then take a left turn into his thigh, and that's why they call it a magic bullet, because that is an awful lot to expect of a bullet. In addition, that bullet that would have gone through the president's back and neck, the governor's rib, and then wrist, fell out of the governor's leg onto his stretcher, and a CIA agent then turned it in. This bullet is not only magic because of what it does, but because of how it looks. Because this bullet, and this is a picture of the actual bullet, there's this little dent here, and if you were to see a side profile of it, it is a little flattened. But when they had tested that same gun on cadavers, on dead bodies, what you have is this being very compacted. I don't know how to word it. It gets smashed. it gets crunched up. When a bullet hits something hard like bone, it should be a face. It should be scrunched. It should be smashed. And when they had shown this on cadavers, these bullets were 50% effaced. In other words, they would all be smushed up into about this size here. And yet this bullet is somewhat pristine. So it should have looked much more different, which is why many people believe that there was a second gunman. Now, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. I tend to think that, one, it's hard to get a lot of people coordinated in the same direction. It's really hard to get people not to talk about stuff, and that sometimes things it's pretty simple. It's a lot of times something looks like what it is because it looks like it because it is. In this case, though, there's really a lot of suspicious things. I don't know what I personally think. I kind of go back and forth, and I've been looking at this off and on for as long as I can remember. But I do want to remind you that conspiracy does not have to be this like international or national thing. A conspiracy could be 50 people in the mob or 50 people in the CIA knew, or a conspiracy by definition could just be another bad person like Oswald, just Oswald and another creep. It's just two people. That by definition would be a conspiracy. And there are a lot of people who just say a second gunman from a different position makes a lot more sense. Then you don't have to have magical bullets. The fact that there are a lot of inconsistencies in eyewitness testimony really doesn't help. It really makes a lot more people believe, oh my gosh, there is a conspiracy going on. There's some really troubling things in this, and here are a couple of them. A lot of people, over a dozen, said they saw a muzzle flash from behind this fence. That fence would have been directly in front of the president when he was first shot. So again, if that bullet is coming from the front, particularly with that headshot, that makes more sense with how his head moves, at least to common sense. We're not experts in ballistics, though. You have another dozen or so people say that this grassy knoll area, there was a shot, a muzzle flash around there, just basically a hill. And some people, and again, this would have been a little bit further along the path, but yes, in the same position again, in front of the president's motorcade. Now, I will say, and I'm sorry, part of this is cut off, but if you have 100 witnesses, you usually get 100 different stories, not 10. That's just the way it is. People have a tendency to over rely on their eyewitness accounts, which are notoriously false. Um, if I always use the example, if we were teaching in my regular classroom and somebody ran in the room and smacked me across the face and ran out, when you got done laughing, I would say, well, what did he look like? And I would have just 25 different descriptions of what that kid looked like or what that person looked like. It's very typical. But we do know Lee Harvey Oswald was there. We do know that he was captured and his fingerprints were on the gun, and we've got him. Now, whether or not he had a co-conspirator, we don't know. But we could ask him because he was in custody. That is very clear. However, Oswald was shot while being transferred from Dallas custody to federal authority custody. And he was shot on live TV. And if you believe there's a conspiracy, the idea that the one known shooter, Oswald, ends up getting killed makes you believe even more in a conspiracy because if someone else was working with him, what a tremendous benefit it would be for them to have him shut up. So, his murder adds to other mysteries. So, for example, Oswald's identity. Oswald has this really checkered past. He was in the military, trained as a sharpshooter. He was thrown out for spreading communist propaganda. He moved to Russia, married a Russian girl. I find all of that fairly believable. What blows me away is that he then asked for permission to come back to the country. I'm not sure why we would have, in the middle of the Cold War, in an anti red hysteria era, have allowed a man we kicked out of the army back into the country with his Russian wife. That doesn't add up for me. Add to that that the CIA has an employee file on him, which the other government agencies have asked to see the file. And they said, well, he was only a janitor for us, so there's no reason for you to see the file. If he was only a janitor, there would be nothing in his file. If he was a CIA agent, then you would want to see his file. Uh, I don't know. I just don't know what to tell you on that one. But there's more. Jack Ruby's identity and connections only bring about more questions. Jack Ruby was a nightclub owner who owed a lot of money to the mob, and they forgave his debts after he was put in prison for killing Oswald. Now, if you believe the mob had something to do with this seems awfully convenient. Essentially, the mob says, listen, we may be in organized crime, but we love America, and we wanted the man who killed our president dead. And so we forgave his debt. That could be one explanation, or if the mob did it, cleaning up their loose ends could be the other. I think this is the most disturbing one for me, or among the most disturbing. There was a film that was shot from behind the president. You know, the Zapruder film is shown from the side. There was another film shot from behind the president that would have shown if there was a muzzle flash on the grassy knoll or the stockade fence. The FBI lost it. Now, that can happen. I mean, things were in chaos. Our country was really shaken up by this. Man, does that look bad for a conspiracy. Even more troubling is JFK's autopsy notes and brain matter were lost. I'm going to tell you why this is such a big deal. Anybody who's watched CSI or Law and Order or anything like that knows that you could figure out whether or not that headshot was from the front or the back by entry and exit wounds. If somebody is shot in any part of their body in one direction, the entry wound will tend to be small, and the exit wound will tend to be significantly larger. In particular, for a headshot, as gruesome as this is, the entry wound still tends to be fairly small, and the exit wound tends to be very large. Um, and if we simply had the autopsy notes, which would indicate, say, I'm making these numbers up, but a 1-inch entry wound and a 5-inch exit wound, you would know exactly from what direction it happened, or if you had the brain matter, but it's lost. Again, maybe it just got lost, but the fact that it was lost certainly doesn't uh, make anybody feel any better about it not being a conspiracy. And then there were some tests who showed it was nearly impossible for Oswald to fire 3 shots in 5.6 seconds and strike the target. But I will tell you, the video that I linked from 48 Hours, they do a test with a gun manufacturer. They actually have a bunch of people reenact it on a track. And so they have this track moving at the same speed as the motorcade, and they have these cutouts that they have people try to shoot in the same amount of time. And one of their volunteers was able to hit actually, I think he made 3 out of 3 shots, which was better than Oswald, in that 5.6 seconds. So it's tough, but 48 Hours did show it was possible. And then, of course, I think for the sort of common sense approach, I didn't want to link the Zapruder film. I think it's a little gruesome. But you are certainly welcome to Google it on your own. But the Zapruder film, so Zapruder, if you look at that, it seems to indicate the bullet strike from the front. And that's because you see the president's head move violently backwards. You would think that if somebody were shot from behind, his head would move violently forward. in that video, you're going to see quite clearly his head move violently backwards. You're also going to see what appears to be a fairly uh, bloody exit to the back of of, I don't mean to be gross, brain matter on the back of the car. Jackie Kennedy even picked up a small piece of his skull as she's crawling on the back of the trunk of the car, thinking that she could put it back. She wasn't in the right place because obviously she had just witnessed her husband get killed, and she's begging these secret agents who are running up behind to hold on to this. So we know there's this very grisly exit wound, which again would seem to indicate that. Now you have some experts, and again they're in that 48 hours, who will tell you that sometimes when people are shot, their bullet gets sort of, or their head gets sort of sucked towards the bullet, and then you could have gruesome entry wounds. You have another expert say that's not how it works in real life. Get out of here. So again, you have experts who disagree. You then have all of these different conspiracy theories about, well, here's who would have wanted him dead, and here's the problem. Unfortunately, even though JFK was a very popular president, there were a lot of people who had motives, and some who out and out stated they wanted him dead. The CIA. The CIA is who thought up the Bay of Pigs invasion that we covered in the last unit. And that thing was a debacle. And when it failed, JFK said he was going to crush the CIA into a million splinters, his quote. That's a pretty good motive for them to want revenge. But again, that's a pretty big stretch to say one government agency wants to plot to kill the president. There could be a difference there. The FBI. The FBI is really sort of struggling with the idea of they don't like that a new guy, their new attorney general, the younger brother of JFK, Bobby Kennedy, is telling them to completely refocus their attention. They want them to work on civil rights. The FBI wants to focus more on the mob. So it's a long story, but one of the reasons that some people theorize that they moved away their attention away from the mob is that JFK's father got rich by bootlegging alcohol, hence had a lot of mob connections. And some people will tell you, and I think some of them are pretty obvious, that the Kennedy family has these connections to organized crime. So the FBI may have resented that, but again, I don't know if that means they would have killed a sitting president. Then you got Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was certainly a very confident man who was the vice president and certainly had a lot to gain by the death of the president. But just because somebody has something to gain does not mean that they did it. Then there's the communists. You could argue communists wanted him dead simply because they embarrassed him in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then you have Cuban exiles who feel that we didn't do enough to take back Cuba during the Bay of Pigs invasion. Then, of course, you have just the mob, and I just explained to you why the mob might like JFK. But this one, I'll be careful with how I word this. This one's more personal. JFK was very infamously unfaithful to his wife, with unfortunately a lot of different people, some of which are famous, by the way. I think I brought up in some classes that it's very well known that he had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, and even his wife figured that out when she sang Happy Birthday to him. You can Google that. Marilyn Monroe sings Happy Birthday. And you go, well, how would people know that he was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe just because she sang Happy Birthday to him at some public function? Because she sings it in a way that will make you super uncomfortable. And it just becomes really obvious they have a personal relationship. All that's to say that allegedly one of the people JFK was having an affair with was the mob boss's wife. And so that would be your personal motive. I don't know. I can't tell you if any of this happened. I can tell you that maybe Lee Harvey Oswald just acted alone. I just don't know. There are still some files that are going to be released uh, after, I believe it is in 2061, because it'll be 100 years after it happened. So we will see if we have any new information that comes out then. Either way, the U.S. was shocked and obviously profoundly saddened by the public loss of such a hope of the youth and the potential goodness of what government and by the way the civil rights movement could do. And he had very young sons, and this is an endearing image of his son John, who was 3 years old, who was saluting the casket as his father was uh, procession went by. John, who grew up to be a very successful and famous person himself, died in a plane crash. There's some who believe there's something called the Kennedy curse. A lot of the Kennedys have certainly died under odd circumstances. So I'll finish up today with one last thing. You may have heard before that JFK has a lot of odd similarities with another president, and that is Abraham Lincoln. And I'll tell you that there are all these books that will list hundreds of things those two men had in common, which really creeps people out. And I will tell you that you can take any two people in the world and you can find a bunch of things that they have in similar, similar interests, similar whatever. So you could take you and me and you go, oh, we both like ice cream, or we both don't like ice cream, or we both like Netflix. You can come up with a million things. Some of these are more pressing than others, so I'll read a few of them. So this is about Kennedy and Lincoln. Both were boat captains. Both had no fear of dying and fired their bodyguards all the time. Both were shot in the head. Both were shot in the head on a Friday before a holiday. Both were seated beside their wives when shot. Both were in the company of another couple when shot. In each case, the man was injured in the other couple, not fatally. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Ford product, a Lincoln limousine. Lincoln sat in box 7 at Ford's Theater. Kennedy rode in car 7 of the motorcade. Both died in a place with the initials P and H. Lincoln died in the Peterson House, and Kennedy died at Parkland Hospital. Booth shot Lincoln at a theater and was cornered in a warehouse. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and was caught and cornered in a theater. The handyman, bill distributor, and part-time concession operator at Ford's Theater was Joseph Peanuts John Burroughs. The concession stand operator at the Texas Theater was Butch Peanuts John Burroughs. Each assassin was detained by an officer named Baker. Each assassin was killed with a single shot from a Colt revolver. Both presidents were named for their grandfathers. Both were their second children of their family. Both had lost a sister to death before they were elected. Each couple had 4 children, 2 of whom died before becoming a teen. Each couple lost a son while in the White House. Lincoln had sons named Robert and Edward. Edward had brothers named Robert and Edward. Let's see. Both were related to ambassadors of the Court of St. James. Both were friends with Illinois Democrats named Adlai Stevenson. Both had religious advisors named Billy Graham. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Here are the ones that get me. Both presidents were elected to the U.S. House in 46, 1846 for Lincoln, 1946 for Kennedy. Both were runners up for their party's nomination for vice president in 56. Both were elected to the presidency in 60. Both made their concerns known about African American issues in 63. Both Lincoln and Kennedy were succeeded by Southern Democrats named Johnson. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson was born in 1908. All right, I think I've creeped you out enough for today. If you want to know more about this assassination, you can click on that 48 hours and kind of go through, and they'll show you all kinds of things on both sides of the issue, and it'll make you think. All right, guys, have a great day. Tomorrow we'll get back to a little bit more in notes.